Okay, so let's change our perspective and dive into the last episode of this masterclass. Now, in the previous episode, we talked through all of the different input parameters that go into creating a release plan or a delivery plan. I'm going to show you a simple spreadsheet template that'll make sense of how you put all of this together. Now, we'll do this in the context of all the parameters that we discussed the last time around, so it all makes sense. Okay, so here's the template that I have for you. I'll put it in the description and you can download it if you have to, but you should be able to come up with something like this on your own as well, something that's more suited to your purpose. But let me show you what we have here. So remember we said there's the notion of raw velocity that you come up with. That was one of the input parameters, right? And that notion of raw velocity is dependent on your iteration length. So I've gone ahead and put in an iteration length of 2 weeks. And I've said that the planned velocity per dev pair per sprint is 5 points. All right. Now let's move on. Remember, we talked about building a capacity plan, and we'll go through a few aspects of that in this. So look, everyone's not going to be working for every single day of the week, every single week of the year. So you assume a certain number of working days. We are assuming about 260 working days. That means that holidays, training, sickness all put together is about 18%. So that's a good place to start with. You're probably also going to have leaders in the team who are not going to be contributing at full tilt. So should their capacity be 30%? I thought maybe our leads, because it's not a very complex project, can contribute at 50%. Okay, let's move on. Remember, we talked about the raw scope that goes into the plan. This is essentially the sum total of the estimates that you've generated in your planning workshop, also known as an inception. So here you have the default value of 100. I'm going to make up a number and let's say it's 256. You'll notice that a bunch of things change. So, for example, here you have the minimum estimated scope changing to 341 because the assumption is that the planning workshop generated only 75% of the requirements. Here, you're assuming that there's 20% additional complexity you would have uncovered later in the project. I went and adjusted it down, if you can see here, to just about 10% instead of 20%. That's the default on this template. And then the pessimistic estimate is that, well, we'll discover 40% additional complexity. I don't think that's going to be the case, so I will revise it down to 20%. So there you go. We came up with an output of 256 points from the inception. It's likely we only discovered 75% of the scope. So we assume that the minimum scope is going to be about 340 points. The median scope, if we have 20% additional complexity, that's going to be about 375 points. And that's the most likely scope. And then the pessimistic scope, where really things go wrong, there's a lot of complexity we uncover, that's going to be 40%. And that's 410 points. And we'll generate a plan for all these three parameters. Okay, coming back to the capacity plan again, remember everyone's not coming onto the project on the very first day. And everyone's also not going to be able to start firing all cylinders right from the first day. So let's address the second point first, which is people don't fire all cylinders from the first day. We believe that in the first sprint, people will only be able to achieve 25% of the velocity, and then they'll gradually ramp up and they will essentially go up to 100% in about 4 sprints. That's about 2 months. Okay, cool. And then release overhead. How much of people's capacity will get taken away when making releases? Now, if this is a big momentous thing, then that capacity will be high. I don't believe it needs to be that high, so I'm going to put it down 20%. I'm being an aggressive planner here. All right, let's move on to the next tab, and you'll see how this whole thing comes into action. So we started planning, if you see, on 4th January 2021. So now it automatically assumes that our sprint start date is from 11th Jan, and that is essentially iteration 0. And we start with a certain team on that particular day. And then we have that team for the first few sprints. Okay. And then we build up the team further. And I can actually go ahead and keep building up this team. Remember, we're trying to hit the likely scope, which is 375 points. So let us say that at this point, which is somewhere in August, I'm going to increase the team size further and add a few more dev pairs and maybe a couple of QAs, because we're going to get closer and closer to production. And then we're going to continue having this capacity going forward until the time that we actually hit our scope. And if you notice, somewhere around sprint 18 is when we are able to hit our targets. Sorry, it's not sprint 18, it's sprint 19 when we're actually going to hit our targets. So let us embolden them, that cell. Maybe I'll just color it differently. And now you know that this is where we hit our plan. So this is a good way to start creating your plan and putting it all together. And as you've noticed, we are able to figure out, okay, how many sprints is it going to take? We know it's going to take 19 sprints. We have a bit of a timeline in place. We have a plan to bring new people on board. So we're going to start with a team of 4, then we'll add more developers, go with that team. And then in the last stretch, we will bring in a few more developers until we hit that number for the first release. So I hope this whole journey makes sense to you and you can see how those different parameters come together to create a cohesive plan. And I hope the spreadsheet gives you a sense of that plan in action. I've enjoyed bringing this masterclass to you. I hope you've enjoyed going through it. Go ahead and apply these concepts, and I wish you all the best.